show the logo on my
Across
shirt.
America, you're listening to the Veterans Impact Show, featuring stories of veterans who continue the mission in their communities with honor, courage, and commitment. Brought to you by Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation and the Texas Veterans Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm flying solo today without my partner in crime. This is Chuck Wright, Marine helicopter pilot and proud advocate for our veterans. Welcome to the Veteran Impact Show. Our motto is Charlie Mike. Charlie Mike is military slang for continue the mission, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. We're going to open the show talking with a couple who are pushing 50 years in marriage. They have done it really and covered kind of all sides of everything, but they continue to serve. I wanted to welcome Jeff Gault and the Honorable Rose Gault. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Thank you, Chuck.
Hey, welcome. Feel free to jump in, and it's just going to be a fun conversation. Talk a little bit about what AUSA is, what it does. Let's talk about this scholarship fund, and I really want to focus on who it helps.
Well, the Army Scholarship Foundation provides academic scholarships to children of soldiers and to spouses of active duty enlisted soldiers. We have helped close to 2,000 military family members, military kids, in the 20 plus years that the foundation has been in existence. So that's our mission, and that's what we do.
Outstanding. So this is a national scholarship program, correct?
Yes, national and actually worldwide, wherever our military serves and wherever our military families live.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize, and one thing I should say, we were talking before the show, I'm an Air Force brat, so I grew up all over the world. We were stationed in Okinawa. We had some of the best, and I'm almost jealous because you guys were talking about doing several stations in Europe and in Germany and the Netherlands and all these cool places. I was in Bakersfield, California at Edwards Air Force Base. My dad was stationed at Altus Air Force Base in southern Oklahoma. And we actually lived. He refused to live in Oklahoma. He was a sixth generation Texan, and he lived in Vernon, Texas. He absolutely refused to have a Oklahoma address or an Oklahoma driver's license. But then we were in Okinawa. We got all the terrible duty stations. We didn't get a good one until he came back to Randolph, which is down in San Antonio, and where eventually they decided to retire. The only house my parents ever owned, my mother still lives in to this day down in Universal City, and it's funny how many Air Force brats that I run into that know exactly where our house is. But talk a little bit about, if you guys will, what got you motivated to start working with AUSA?
Rose?
Well, this is really funny. I started working for what's called the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation, and then through that I came in touch with someone who had started what was called then the Paladin Foundation, and they were giving scholarships to children of Army soldiers. And this person needed some help, so I said, well, hey, my husband can help you. I can, because I'm working for this other service. That was the conflict of interest. Well, after I didn't work for them any longer, both of us got involved. And then the other people who were younger than we were, they got involved in their careers, and Jeff retired from the Army. So we kind of said, okay, we can do this. So we took over, and we went from giving out, about 3 or 4 scholarships, and now we're giving out about 300 every year.
Wow.
And there's a great need, as you well know, Chuck. Army kids have a lot of needs. The Army families have a lot of needs. And Jeff will talk about that in a little bit, why they do. So we just kept going, and it kept sort of snowballing. And as I said, now we're giving out 300 scholarships almost, or sometimes more than that every year. And it's a lot of work, but we enjoy it, and we have a lot of fun with it.
That's just an outstanding way to continue the mission. And it's interesting. You see so few organizations that are focused on the kids. And yet it's the parents, and part of this touches, obviously I'm a brat, so it touches me. But then I've done a lot of work with another great organization, which is the Gold Star Family Monument Program, to remember those who have, those families that every day is Memorial Day for them, that have actually lost somebody in the line of duty. And we tend to forget. I mean, we're right in the heart of Veterans season, and I call Veterans season September 11th to November 11th. And it's just that time where we try to remember. But these scholarships are impacting the kids that it's 24/7, 365 days a year, that they are living, breathing the life. And it's very much the life. I've told this story before on the air. Probably the biggest compliment I got when I went to officer candidate school is we have things called Mustangs. And Mustangs are prior enlisted people who become officers. And it's kind of a special group. And needless to say, we had 6 of them. I remember it really well because 2 of them I'm still good friends with. In my OCS class, we had 6 prior enlisted. 3 of them had been embassy guards, which is kind of the best of the Marine Corps a lot of the time. And really talented, really sharp people. But I was standing and we were talking, and I guess we were 2 or 3 weeks into OCS, and I don't remember exactly the circumstances, but one of them looked at me and said, "So what did you do in the Marine Corps? Or what did you do in the military?" Because a couple of them were from another service and were coming into the Marine Corps. And I looked at him and said, "What? I was never in the military." And they looked at me and went, you seem like you understand it. And where I'm going with this story is the military is a culture. It's very much this culture, and these kids become part of it, but they just don't have a lot of times the opportunities when they finish. And a lot of them, very much like our transitioning veterans, when they start to move away from their military family, they get a little lost. You know, it's this, wait a minute, these other kids, they don't think like we do. That our military kids face a lot of challenges. You guys were talking about how many times you moved, and it made me think about how many different schools that I went to, how many times I had to pick up my entire life, give up all of my friends, and then go meet a new set. Now, eventually you get to high school. Talk a little bit about how well do you guys get to know? I'm going off of my own weird stories. How well do you guys get to know some of these kids? Kind of walk us through the process of a kid coming and getting a scholarship, and kind of what you're targeting, what you're looking at.
Well, as you know, as a military brat yourself, our military family members serve too. The families serve. Although the kids don't choose that life, they're born into it.
Yep.
The soldiers who enlist in the military or join the military make an affirmative decision to join the military. Their kids do not. And they go through so many sacrifices just by being a part of a military family, as you mentioned, frequent moves, starting over with new schools, missing out on extracurricular activities, not getting elected to the offices or selected as captain of this or that team, or even have an opportunity to play on the team because it's all set the spring before, if you will. Having differing graduation requirements, in-state tuition issues. There are so many challenges that they face. Also, lower income than your average family, because if the spouse or the kid works, they have to start over after every move.
Yep.
And they generally have to look for a job, and they start at the bottom as the junior person. And so they have a lower median family income compared to your average American family that stays in the same location. So this is our way of saying thank you and of giving back to these military family members for their sacrifices. We go through an annual cycle. They apply to us in the spring. We're an all volunteer organization, so no one is paid in the Army Scholarship Foundation, but we have a group of volunteers that evaluates all of the scholarships, and we evaluate them based on the character, their extracurricular activities, their financial need, which is the most important factor, and a number of other criteria. And then we, based on how much money we have or don't have, we have to put them in a rank order and then draw a cut line. And unfortunately say to roughly a third of these kids, I'm sorry, you know, you're really a deserving kid, but we don't have enough money to give you a scholarship this year.
That has to be tough. So we'll continue in the process here a little bit. Are the scholarships done? So you talked about being a national organization, and I understand that you have chapters all around the country. Are the scholarships done on a regional basis, or are the kids competing nationally or regionally? Talk a little bit about how that works.
No, it's nationwide. It's not by region. So we get applications from kids who are living in Korea, in the Middle East, in Europe, or in, you know, everywhere from Florida to Oregon. And they're all collected here in Dallas, and that's where our volunteers come together to review all of these applications and make the recommendations.
Excellent. And it's one thing you said. Let's talk about that a little bit, because some of our listeners may be going, got kids coming out of Korea and Japan and the Middle East and Europe. We have people stationed at all of these bases. So talk about a little bit about the challenges that those kids face.
Rose, you want to talk about that?
Well, it's not just the challenges of the kids that are overseas, but what I really want to talk about a little bit is the fact that, as Jeff mentioned, the challenges that the kids face in the families and what they're up against. And with the last 20 years, as you well know, it's the challenges of the kids that have faced, of the service members, the pressures they've been with the many deployments. And you said about getting to know the kids. Well, unfortunately, sometimes we get to know the kids or the circumstances a little bit too well. It has happened where kids have applied, and one time Jeff came home and said to me, look at this application. And out came an application, and with the application came 2 death certificates.
Oh my gosh.
And the one death certificate said cause of death, shot to the head. The other one said cause of death, shot to the chest, I think it was. So what had happened was the father had shot the mother and then had shot himself, killed himself. So it was like a murder-suicide. So the father, the service member, had been so depressed that he killed his wife and killed himself.
Oh,
so
man.
the student had remained an orphan. And this person had grown up. I mean, I just couldn't talk, but we were just devastated. If you get something like that in your hands, and this person had grown up,
wow,
gone to the Guardian, because the Guardian had signed the application.
That is such a powerful story. We're going to take a quick break. For our radio listeners, Facebook hanging around, we're going to be back in a few seconds. Okay, we're going to continue that story. We kind of a bit of a somber story, but our military kids face all kinds of challenges, and that's one of the things. Let's go down that path a little bit, and because the other thing I wanted to talk about was income, and I haven't thought about this in a long time because I've been out for quite a while. But our military is not paid particularly well, and this is not a big advocate for big pay raises and all that. I'd love it, but talk a little bit about, we're talking about kids that are coming out of, most of these kids have incomes that are below real median income in America.
Yes. Well, we get those. We have an income limit also, because we have several criteria for the scholarships, Chuck. We have income, we have grades, we look at kids, how they perform in their communities. Some kids have to work, because this is what you mentioned, income. Some families need the kids' income. Maybe even you were in high school, you had a job. Maybe my husband had a job and he was in high school to support the family. Some kids have to support the family.
Yep.
So we look at all those factors. But some kids have to support themselves. They may not have a family that can support them. So we get all kinds. And it's, again, as my previous story, there's some sad stories. We have kids that have annual incomes of maybe $15,000 or something like that. We have families with 4 kids that have very low incomes. So we evaluate all those applications by these separate criteria.
And as I mentioned earlier, Chuck, the most military families today, the spouses have to work.
Yes.
And so when after every move, which happens a lot, they have to start over. They have to look for a job. They have to try and find work. And so they start at the bottom of the salary scale wherever they have just moved to. So one data point, the average family income of our scholarship recipients is less than $65,000 per year.
Wow. That is not high. These are families that are not making a lot of money, and they have a huge need. So that is one of the things that's so valuable about this program. And we're out here with our we're just on Facebook now, but for our Facebook listeners, we've thrown up the scholarship site, and when we come back, we'll talk about how to get to the website, how to find more information. But it's really an important program, because one thing that I found, and something else we talked about off the air, was the resiliency of our military kids, of our brats. And I get to call us brats because I are one of them. But and I realized it creates opportunities. You have to mature a little bit faster. But I also realize it creates handicaps. I can't get in touch with anybody that I went to elementary school with, because I was going to elementary school on Okinawa. And it was just different. It's just a different life.
It sure is, Chuck. It sure is. And that's why
Welcome back
Jeff,
to the
hang on.
Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation.
Hey, welcome back to our radio listeners. We've been live on Facebook, but we're bringing terrestrial radio back. This is the Veteran Impact Show, dedicated to the concept of Charlie Mike, military slang for continue the mission. And we're talking today to a couple, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them as a couple, because they've got a really, really interesting backstory. But they are working with, as volunteers for the Army Scholarship Fund, the Army Scholarship Foundation. Facebook, you've seen the website up. Jeff, why don't you give us that website for those that want to get more information about these scholarship programs?
It's www.armyscholarshipfoundation, one word, armyscholarshipfoundation.org. And there you can find out about how to make a tax-deductible donation, about our events. We have an event coming up here on the 5th of November in Dallas, a luncheon, and other future events, as well as the application materials for students who wish to apply for a scholarship.
Well, the event is on the 4th of November. It's Friday the 4th.
Friday the 4th of November.
The football game is the 5th. It's the Army Air Force football game on the 5th, by the way.
Oh, that's exactly
right. You may want to
right.
go to that football game.
Yes, at Globe Life Park. It is the Commander's Trophy,
Yeah.
and that night, my wife and I will be attending our first Skyball. So that should be a lot of fun. That is great. I had the opportunity last year at as a Marine, I practiced the concept of low friends and high places. In one of my low friends and high places hooked me up. The head of the Houston, and I hate it, I can't remember his name. I wasn't prepared to tell this story, but the head of the West Point Officers Alumni Association out of Houston had gotten 2 suites at Globe Life Park, and it's a beautiful indoor park. And I got invited, and it was fun because I was the only Marine in the room. And so we had a lot of fun with that. It was a good time. But, the Secretary of Defense. He may have come by, but it was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came by. General starts with an M, and I can't remember his name. General Milley. Yes, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, he stopped by. That was kind of interesting to meet somebody famous. But great event, and that is I love the fact that I'm hoping this Army Air Force series continues. Although as an Air Force brat, I'll full disclosure, I was pulling for the Air Force, and face it, go Navy, beat Army. And I thought that, and I have to give a shout out to my middies. They played, and they were really outmatched. Army had a really good football team last year. I'm not sure how good they are this year because I do follow Army when they're not playing Air Force and Navy, but sorry, you guys are third in that scenario. But I love the Army-Navy game is one of the greatest college football games played. It is it's played with such passion, such emotion, and it was really – I was amazed because I fully expected Navy to get blown out last year. And it is difficult to get D1 level college athletes at the academies at the level when you're competing with somebody who can go to Texas or Alabama or Tennessee or UCLA or somewhere like that. It's a tough pull for the service academies, but they play with such passion. And I remember the years that Navy was really, really strong there for a while, and it didn't matter. Army showed up and literally left everything on the field. It was so cool. So sorry, we're kind of going off on a. You got me started on football, and you shouldn't do that when I've got a Longhorn game coming up right after this. But what I want to do, talk a little bit more about this luncheon in Dallas on the 4th of November. Talk about that, and can we get that information on the same website?
Yes.
Definitely, yeah. You can go on our website, as Jeff said, www.armyscholarshipfoundation.org, and click on events, and that's all the information you need. You can get a ticket or get a sponsorship right there on the site, or you can download a form and send us a check with the form and buy a ticket. The tickets are $150 per person, which, by the way, for Dallas is a really good price. You don't get any luncheon tickets for charitable events in Dallas for that price. No way. So it's at the Frontiers of Flight Museum on Friday the 4th, as we said, at 11:30 a.m.
Right. Okay.
There will be valet parking, and it'll be a delicious lunch catered by Celebrations.
Oh, this is outstanding. We're going to we're lining up to take one more quick break as we go off radio, but I want to continue this for our Facebook crowd. Facebook, stick around with us. This is the Veteran Impact Show. Thank you for tuning in this morning. Okay, we are still live on Facebook. Sorry, it's the breaks happen, and I've got to be responsive to them. And I'm not as good as Jim is at this. He's got this wired down a little bit better. I'm not used to being in charge of the going out and coming back in.
You're doing a great job.
But I want to tell you something. I love to share this story because this luncheon's going to be at the Frontiers of Flight Museum. If you have not been there, this is an incredible facility. But literally the last airplane I ever landed, and you'll know the one I'm talking about when I say this, is hanging from the roof of the Frontiers of Flight Museum. It's my friend Jan Colmer, who is an Navy F-8 pilot from Vietnam, and he ran Colmer Semiconductors. They used to make semiconductors, and he did that for years. Brilliant engineer. But he was also the FINA's stunt pilot. And it's a little Pitts stunt plane, biplane, and all painted up with FINA on it. And they were his big sponsor. But that was the last airplane I ever landed. It was the last plane I ever was a pilot on. So when you go to the foundation, and we're going to try to get tickets for it, but when you go to the foundation, you look up and go, oh yeah, Czech flew that plane. And there are examples of two other planes in there. There's several of the aircraft that I have flown, although they're not the exact one. That's the only one that's exact. So it's my Frontiers of Flight story, but it is a fabulous venue. And talk about, because I noticed, but I didn't catch his name, you have a pretty impressive guest speaker.
Yes, Major General Ken Camper, who is the commanding general of Fort Sill, Oklahoma, the fire center, is going to be our guest speaker. Has an impressive resume, tours in Iraq, tours in Afghanistan. His previous assignment was as the deputy commander at Fort Hood. And he served for over 30 years in the Army all around the world. And he's going to give a great talk about the status of the Army today, talk a little bit about Afghanistan and how things are going. And I suspect he may even talk a little bit about the combat operations in the Ukraine.
That would be most interesting. And you kind of gave us a great segue there. Speaking of impressive resumes, I'm going to get Jeff to start first to talk a little bit about your Army career, but then I want to bounce over to the Honorable Rose Gault, because she left the service with a pretty impressive title. So Jeff, kick this off.
Well, I graduated from West Point and was commissioned in the Air Defense Artillery Missile Defense. I served 29 years in the Army, to include 5 tours in Europe, in various parts of Germany. Yeah, 5 times. One time in the Netherlands, of those 5.
Faithful.
Huh?
Faithful.
Yeah. And then
you ate lots of chocolate when you were in the Netherlands, right?
Yeah, we did. And then I had 2 less enjoyable assignments during combat operations in the Middle East. I served in Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Wow.
And then subsequently one additional deployment over there.
Okay,
and then I retired from the Army out of Fort Bliss.
We're going to come back. We're going to have the radio world rejoin us.
Welcome back. This is the Veterans Impact Show, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this conversation.
Hey, welcome back. We've got everybody. We've got radio back. We've got Facebook back. You can see this on YouTube. In fact, one of our big asks for you, as one of our listeners, is like us on Facebook at the Veteran Impact Show. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It doesn't cost anything, but it helps us as we're getting pushed out into the cyberspace. So we love to say we headquarter out of Texas, so the show tends to take a little bit of a Texas feel to it, but we're broadcast nationally, internationally, because we're on Facebook. And I have heard that thanks to the Space Force that they are beaming our signals out into the galactic world. So, hopefully we're going to get a chance to interview the Guardians of the Galaxy eventually. Okay, I'm just being silly now. But we're doing something really cool because you talk about some impressive resumes. I want to talk about, and you got to start with your title and how you got here. I am fascinated with this. We're going to talk about the Honorable Rose Gault and how she got to be in charge of the Air Force. And how you got over to the Air Force married to an Army guy. So that's 2 stories we need you to tell.
Well, Chuck, I was really not in charge of the Air Force, so let's just...
That's not what Jeff said.
Sure. Not really. but I was, for years and years, I was an Army spouse. And as you know, with the Army Scholarship Foundation, we do give scholarships to Army spouses. And I think it's very, very important to get a college degree. So I worked for many years to get that college degree. And eventually I did at the University of Texas at El Paso. And that helped me a lot. It really sort of catapulted my career. And I worked we moved 20 times, as we've told you before, just not on air. Now it's on air. And that's quite difficult to keep a job. But eventually we did spend some time in Northern Virginia, and I worked for a U.S. congressman for 8 years. And from there, I was chosen for a job in the Pentagon with the United States Air Force. I was selected to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Strategic Diversity Integration. I know that's really a mouthful, but what that means is that I led the diversity program for the Air Force, which was very interesting because, as you well know, the Air Force consists mainly of a lot of academy graduates and very heavy on the male side. So we had to really find a balance there to sort of integrate females, and diversity in general, inclusion as they call it these days, but also to make sure that everybody understands what diversity really means, which is not just race, sex, and religion. It's also having to deal with people who have different ideas, people who come from different backgrounds, from different parts of the country or even of the world. So it was all in all a very interesting job, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And, well, it came with a nice title, as you said.
I was going to say, that's a title that takes 2 business cards.
Well, yeah, it was a little hard to get on one business card, but I managed. And it was very, very interesting, and I learned a lot. And we did a lot of work. We established a diversity office on Andrews Air Force Base, and we did videos. I did a lot of travel. We got a lot of people. We informed them a lot. I attended conferences, NAACP conferences. So it was a very interesting job. And Jeff could go with me on several occasions, so he learned something too.
There we go. We have to like it. We were talking off the air, and it's very interesting. And I am going to go a little bit political, but this is more of a culture conversation as opposed to a political party. We tend to say political, and I think the word gets a little bit lost. But I grew up as an Air Force brat. We grew up in a culture, and I truly believe this. I truly believe that it was World War II and the lessons learned in World War II, serving side by side with people of different colors, different ethnicities. It's one of the things the military becomes this incredible melting pot. And in it, we serve this purpose of finding out what we have in common, not different. We focus on what we have in common, and there is so much in common. There is so much opportunity in the military, but I am absolutely convinced it's because of the experiences of World War II. When you are out literally sweating and bleeding and living and dying with somebody, you start to not see them as a white person, a brown person, a red person, a black person. When the Windtalkers were with the Marines in the Pacific, they were so critical to what went on. We talk about the Rainbow Division. I was stationed in Hawaii for a while, and Hawaii is very proud of the Rainbow Division. That was the most decorated, I said division, it might be a regiment. And I get all those levels of command confused because I'm an Air Force kid, and I think in terms of squadrons. And then I was a flyboy in the Marine Corps, so it's squadrons, it's groups, and it's wings, and it's all that stuff. Anyway, the point I'm making is the Rainbow Division fought in Italy and was the most decorated unit in the U.S. Army. And it's the kind of thing literally that drove the nation's acceptance of the civil rights movement. Yeah, I know it was tough. There were people who were dug in, but almost none of those people were veterans. The veterans very much were leading the way and saying, yeah, So to your point about diversity and the importance of that, the military's understood that. I grew up in an environment that didn't understand the hate that's out there today. And I don't want to go down that path too far. But I do think, and again, back to the show is about Charlie Mike. What are we doing to continue the mission? And our veterans have always led the way, whether it's as they're serving or when they get out and they continue to serve, as you guys are doing right now, creating opportunities for young people to get advanced degrees, to advance themselves in life. And I'm sorry, it's one of my most passionate rants. The other thing there's two other things that came out of World War II, and Jeff will know exactly where I'm going with this. And one of them, I'm absolutely convinced that part of the boom was the VA home loan program that allowed so many veterans to buy first homes and to get started in life. And it's so critical financially, long term. As we've gotten a little older, we can look back and we see it. I think people, when they're younger, don't see it as much. But the other one, and I think it was one of the other huge drivers in our post-World War II economy, was the GI Bill. And so you're creating similar opportunities for these kids, like programs like the GI Bill did, but it educated so many people. And I'm a big believer that all boats rise with a rising tide. And I'm sorry, I've gone on one of my notorious rants. I tried to keep that from being too political. It is kind of a political thing, but it is very much what you're doing. So it's interesting that you were working with diversity, especially the Air Force, but all of the services. And of course, and I'm biased because I grew up in an Air Force environment, in an Air Force culture. And we had a culture that always practiced inclusion. I've got a story I can't tell on the air, but I didn't know what the N-word meant. I had never heard it before. And I had no clue what it meant. Literally no clue. I mean, I was a bit naive, a bit oblivious, and I was in high school. Well, I'm going to go ahead. I'll finish the story. This is a great story, even though it's a little too much about me. But I used the N-word. And my buddy that I rode to school with was the quarterback of our football team, who just happened to be black. And I could see his dad get mad, and I went, oh, I've done something wrong. But I had no idea what it was. And then I saw his face soften. And he looked at me and goes, Chuck, you have no idea what that word means. And I went, no. I was trying to use it and be funny. And so he told me the story, but it was so funny because here I am being educated about this by a black man who goes, yeah, you're just a dumb kid and you don't get it. Needless to say, I have never used that word in conversation again. But it was that kind of actual, very real tolerance and understanding the shoes that somebody else walked in. Now, Squibby, and I'll throw his name out there, Squibby Brown, absolutely great guy. Last I heard, he was in California. I do love Facebook because it's allowed me to get back in touch with a lot of high school friends. Elementary school, not so much, but the point that I'm driving at this is Squibby didn't understand it either. He didn't get it. And I was like, that's always stuck with me. It's one of the things that I love about the military, and it goes back to Martin Luther King's quote, is that people are judged by their performance, by their content of character. And I'm actually leading into something in my typical long-winded way. But I wanted to talk about, as we're getting into the second half of the show, but would you guys talk about a little bit about what you would say as you're talking to these scholarship kids? And I'm going to assume, for the purposes of this, that you're not necessarily pushing these people to a military career, but what would you tell a young person who's thinking about going into the military?
I would say it's the great equal opportunity employer. The military is, as you indicated, Chuck, it's colorblind. The mission of the military is to perform as a unit to defend our country as an organization. You know, be it a battalion or a squadron or an individual rifle squad or a ship, what have you. All of the members of that military unit have to pull together and do their job in order to accomplish the mission, which is defending our freedom and our American way of life. And it must be colorblind. It must be diverse. You cannot accomplish the mission if you're hung up on some of these individual issues. And so it's the greater good for the unit, the greater good for the military, and the greater good for our nation that makes our military colorblind. And we promote that as well with the Army Scholarship Foundation. We receive applications from military family members, as we said, around the globe, all races, creeds, and colors. And we award scholarships with no special consideration to any separate group. We award to all.
Well, along that line, during our application process, we get photographs from the kids, because as you were showing earlier on the screen, Chuck, you saw a collage of all the photographs. But during the application process, those photographs are not included. So our evaluators do not know what the students look like. So basically, they have no idea what ethnicity these students are, whether they're white, black, or Asian, or whatever. So they're basically totally anonymous. They just go by what's in front of them and the grades or the financial situation of the students. So there can be no prejudice when these students are selected for their scholarships.
That's wonderful
all totally
stuff.
Above board.
And we keep talking about students, but Rose, I want you to come around. You said something earlier, and I want you to talk about this for just a second, if you would. You talked about these scholarships are available to spouses as well. And let's talk about that for a minute.
Right. Well, as Jeff said earlier, spouses, it's really tough for a spouse in the Army. And let me tell you, I've experienced this myself. When we were stationed at West Point at one point, and I got a job. And about a year and a half later, I had to quit this job, and I gave my notice. I said to my boss, I said, well, we're moving to Europe. And the guy said, well, if I had known that you were going to move this quickly, I would not have given you this job.
Yep.
And that was a typical reaction that Army spouses get. They just, if someone knows that you're an Army spouse, they're not going to give you a job. Yep. It's very, very difficult. I got kind of mad, and I said, well, that's against the law. You can't do that. Yep. So I sort of had not disclosed the fact that my husband was in the Army.
So I'm gonna share this real fast. We've got about a minute before another break, but my mother was a teacher. She spent her entire teaching career working for the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense, they would go out and hire, and they'd do it just like the recruiters for the services would do. Hey, come see the world, come to Japan, come to Germany, go see all these wonderful places. My mom's first duty station, and they treated the teachers just like they do the military. They assign you. You get voluntold to do stuff. St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. My dad was part of shutting down the base at Pepperell Field. As we transitioned from prop planes that needed to refuel coming across the Atlantic to jets that could make the entire jump across the pond, as they said. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, we're good. We're still here on Facebook. Facebook, thanks for putting up with our terrestrial radio breaks. I know it makes the show a little bit odd. You're listening to the Veteran Impact Show. Our motto is Charlie Mike, and it's wonderful. We've spent the morning with a couple that both served from the standpoint that the Honorable Miss Rose was working for the Department of the Air Force for a while, and the retired colonel did almost 30 years in the Army. So thank both of you for your service and your contribution to our country and everything you've done. And we're talking about the Army Scholarship Fund. We're talking about the November 4th luncheon at the Frontiers of Flight. So if you're anywhere near North Texas on the 4th of November, hop on the website, armyscholarshipfoundation.org, and grab tickets to this event. As I mentioned earlier, you can actually, Frontiers of Flight is an incredible flight museum. I really enjoy it. As an Air Force brat, obviously I am addicted to airplane museums. I noticed in your career, you never talked about being stationed in Okinawa. I'll tell another quick story about me, and then we'll jump back to talking about you guys. The Army has it's a small museum, but at the base at Sukaran on Okinawa, they have a great exhibition of the Battle of Okinawa. And I don't know how many times my parents would go over to Sukaran to shop at the PX, the base exchange. And you know what? Another code I've never broken. It's PX because it's post-exchange. There we go. Sorry about that. The way the different exchanges call themselves. Anyway, sorry. I go off on some strange tangents sometimes. And the funny thing is the Gaults are sitting there going, I know exactly what he's talking about. But if you're not in the military, you don't get the anagrams. You don't get the little military slang terms. But when my parents would be shopping, they would literally park me over at the museum and then pick me up afterwards. So it was always kind of funny, but I enjoyed that so much. Very fond memories growing up. So I was going to ask you, Jeff, did you guys ever get stationed at Patch?
No.
In Stuttgart?
No.
So we had a chance. The only time I've been to Europe, my wife and I took a trip. One of her high school buddies was stationed at Patch. He was in E9 in the Air Force, is in the intelligence community, a big intelligence facility there, and it's kind of it's a joint base, so all the services are there. It was kind of cool walking around, and you see all the different uniforms.
UCOM.
Is that what it was? Yeah, I wasn't even sure what it
UCOM,
was.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But Stuttgart, which is in southern Germany, I mean, we were in the heart of Nazi Bavaria. It was such a cool place. It was so pretty. There's a couple places in the U.S. that remind me of it: Colorado Springs, Leavenworth, Washington, when you get up in the foothills of the mountains. Absolutely beautiful. This has nothing to do with the military. But if you're ever in Stuttgart, Germany, any of our listeners, highly, highly recommend the Mercedes Museum. That was so cool. And it's done, if you're familiar with the Gutenberg Museum in Los Angeles. Oh, we're about to come back, so I'll tell that story. I'll finish that story another time. Just remember the Mercedes Museum, and we're about to come back from break.
Welcome back. This is the Veterans Impact Show, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this conversation.
We want to thank all of our listeners, particularly our listeners in South Texas on the No Bull Network. I'm not kidding. That's what it is. Radio serving the smaller towns, the towns I'm very familiar with down south of San Antonio, and I have family down that way. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, my dad was a my dad was a sixth generation. I'm a seventh generation. I didn't say that quite right in the beginning. We literally trace our roots back to the original. They are called the Old 300 in Texas. It was the original 300 settlers, and actually typical Texans, they're like Marines, they can't count. There are actually only 297 of us, but the original settlers of Texas that Stephen F. Austin brought in that started Texas, and we won't go down that path on this show, but won't be long. We'll be talking about the path to Texas independence. But more importantly, we are talking with, and this will be the last segment of the show, but we are talking with the Gaults. They have an incredible resume of service to our nation, and then Charlie Mike, they continue the mission by serving with the Army Scholarship Foundation and providing scholarships to the spouses and students and of our military. In the Honorable Miss Rose, would you wrap up talking about our spouses in our last segment of the show, because you provide opportunities for spouses as well?
Yes, as I mentioned before, the life of the spouse, of an Army spouse, is not easy. I lived it myself for 25 years, and I had different jobs, but every time you have a job and your husband, your spouse gets orders, you've got to pack up and go. So I've been not accepted for a job, or I was accepted for a job, and then my employer would get angry with me because I had to quit, because I had to leave. So it's very, very important for a spouse to get a college degree. After I got my college degree, which was later on in life, I did get some very interesting jobs. And one of them is what you just mentioned, Chuck. I became Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force because luckily at that time, we lived in Virginia for a longer period of time, and I was able to hold down a job for a while. So I got selected for this position in the Pentagon, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it went very well. But all in all, the life of a spouse in the Army is just not easy. The other thing is the husband or the spouse gets deployed. You have to take care of the children. Things can go wrong. Children get sick. You have to find assistance. It's just not, it's difficult. So we decided early on when Jeff and I took over the foundation that we would change the rules. We asked the board for approval that we would give scholarships to spouses. And they approved, and that's what we've been doing. So we want to spread the word, especially through this program, that we give scholarships to spouses of Army soldiers. We give the scholarships to spouses of enlisted soldiers because we feel very strongly that they need it the most.
Yep.
Their pay is low. Most of the time they can't afford going to college, and we want to encourage them to apply. So please, let's spread the word that Army spouses of enlisted soldiers can apply to the Army Scholarship Foundation. Just go online. Applications become available on the 15th of January of every year, and you can download your application or you can apply online.
So one more time, and I think that's so important. We want to talk about a couple of things that are coming up, but the Army Scholarship Foundation.org is the website. Jump on there. Share this with those that you know that are in the Army that have kids or have spouses that are getting close to being ready for college, so our juniors and our seniors. Spouses obviously can do it at any point in time. I can't believe how fast this show has gone by. Jeff, I'm going to give you the last 60 seconds to wrap up with your thoughts.
Thank you. As I said, the Army Scholarship Foundation gives scholarships to children of soldiers and spouses of active duty enlisted soldiers. Donations can be made by mailing a check to our address on the website or online on the website at armyscholarshipfoundation.org. All donations are 100% tax deductible according to the IRS code, and we're an all-volunteer organization. No one gets paid, neither one of us nor anyone else who works with the organization draws a salary. And the reason for that is so that we can maximize the funds that we give to our deserving Army family members who make so many sacrifices.
That is simply outstanding. We're about to jump off. Jim likes to close with a prayer. I'll just say, my God, we know you by many names, but always be looking out for our men and women standing in harm's way. Thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Great guests, a lot of fun.
Thank you, Chuck.